Hi, this is Kevin, and this is a tutorial just to acquaint you with the workflow for the final project. Um, I've made a number of changes in the instructions for this semester, and I wanted to make them a bit more foolproof, and I think they probably are. But just some commentary here I think should help keep you out of trouble. Okay, so these are the instructions. Um, I put some annotations on here to help with my tutorial. I'll probably post the annotated ones as well, so if you want to go back and see the annotations, you can. So they'll be up on the weekly schedule too. Okay. So here's a list of contents in the instructions. Okay. Um, Here's the overview of the assignment. Okay. So the final assignment is to create a MySQL-based business system solution for a fictitious small business, Wilma's Wild, Wisconsin, henceforth referred to in the instructions as WWW. You may accomplish this by following the steps below. So I've got a group of 9 steps here, and these actually correspond to a group of 9 steps that I've got more details for that come after. Okay, 1, 2, and let's just go through. There's 4, there's 5, there's 6, there's 7, there's 8, and there's 9. Okay, so the front part is just kind of like an overview, and what comes after is the detail. And then after that are a number of appendices. Okay, Appendix A is the logical database design EER diagram. Okay, so you've got that. All right. And then after that, you have Appendix B, which just gives you a list of the data files for the tables. Okay, and there is access to the zip on our weekly schedule. Okay, so that's how you get the data files. Next, these are reports that I put together. They're fake reports for this small business, and they're supposed to be the state of business records before we build the new system. Okay, and the story says that Wilma, the owner of Wilma's Wild, Wisconsin, has been using spreadsheets to manage her business, and these are copies of them. Okay, now I want to mention that the test data that we have in our new system is inspired by these test data, but it's not the same. Okay, so if you just want to get a feel for the records that the business would have before we get started with the new solution, you can look at these spreadsheet reports. Okay, that's what they're good for. Okay, for instance, don't compare your output from your test to these reports because they don't match exactly. There's a lot of common stuff, but they don't match. Okay, and then the last thing I have in Appendix D is just a copy of the case that describes the business and what's going on and why we're changing it and what we're trying to achieve. And I think that could help you kind of understand the database a little bit better, and that's why I included it. Okay, and it gives you a more complete, tied together story. So let's go back to the beginning of the workflow that you're going to be doing. Okay, the first thing that you're going to do, you're probably going to read the case. Well, what do I say? I want you to read the case. Then I want you to review the logical database design. Okay, well, let's go see that. Logical database design is in Appendix A. It's on the next page here. And let's make it a little bigger. Let's plus it. Okay. I've already designed the database for you. Okay, this isn't where we're trying to prove that we know how to design a database. This is where we prove that we know how to implement a design that we're given. Okay, and I want you to follow this pretty faithfully. Okay, so I want you to have just this number of tables, and I want them to have these names, and I want you to have just these columns, and I want them to have these names. I think the data types on each of the columns are probably just what you need. They worked for me, so they ought to work for you. The columns ought to be in this order. Why? Well, when you go, because the columns were in this order when I exported the data to create the test data files. And if you have them in a different order, well, it's going to add them back, but it's going to add the data back to the wrong column. Okay? You need to have these relationships implemented with foreign key constraints. Okay? And all the other aspects that are important for the data, important for the database, have to be things that you think about. Okay. Also, I've identified the primary keys. I've identified the foreign keys. You just have to make it happen in the tools. Okay. Also, pay attention to which columns are not allowed to be null. Pay attention to which ones have to be unique. For instance, these kind of lookup tables like destination or gathering point. They have an ID and they have a name or a description. Okay? Well, the IDs have to be unique because they're primary keys. We don't want the descriptions or the names to be duplicates, because if we put in two entries that have the same value, how are we going to tell them apart? We can't. So these are the cases where you need to add unique constraints. I'm going to be looking for that. All right? So implement this database design. Okay? Then you have to create a schema. Now, how are you going to create the schema? Well, you've got two alternatives. Okay. Alternative one is to code the script that creates the schema by hand. I personally consider that to be a lot of work. Okay. Alternative two is to use the workbench tool and to use the diagrammer in order to create a full EERD for the database, and then go through and make all the changes that you need to do things like force columns to be unique, force columns that are not allowed to be null to be not null. Take columns that, like some of the primary keys, should probably auto increment. Do that kind of stuff. Well, for me, it's easier to do that in the diagrammer. And then when you get the diagram in good shape, well then export the diagram. Okay, forward engineer it. Now, I know when we did chapter 10 exercise 3, Many people had a hard time in getting that to work. Some people, because that forward engineer feature in Workbench seems to be broken in the latest version of Workbench. Some people were able to use a workaround by copying the script that was generated by the forward engineer to the clipboard, and then just simply pasting that into a script, and then running the script. So they didn't actually technically export the script because the export for the script was not working. Okay. Other people like me just went with the earlier version of Workbench. So I've got a tutorial that I put together that's with the exercises for Chapter 10 in the weekly schedule that shows you how to get around that issue. If you can't get around that issue, you won't be able to forward engineer from the diagram. Okay. When you do that, when you have the database just the way you want it, or you think you have it the way you want it, then you need to be able to populate the database by loading the test data. Okay, I've provided the test data in CSV files. Okay, now you may have to do this a number of times. Depending on how you want your workflow to go. The way I do the workflow is I make all the changes to my schema in the diagrammer. Okay? And as soon as I find out that there's a problem with my schema, I go back to the diagrammer, I fix it in the diagrammer, and then I forward engineer it again. Okay? Well, when I get done with that, the database is empty. That means I have to run the loads again. I have to load all the tables again. So while you're working on the project, you're probably going to be kind of cycling through steps 3 and 4. Okay? And then, well, I guess then you're going down to 5 and 6. But every time you get into trouble, you're probably going to back up to step 3. Okay? You're going to change the schema around, and then you're going to forward engineer it, and then you're going to load the tables, and then you're going to go off and see if you can work with that, with all the scripts that you're writing. Okay? Now, is it possible to make the changes just in Workbench and not have them go back to the diagram? Well, you can, and some people have done that. I've seen people get pretty turned around that way. So make your choices and see how it's going to work out. I just want to point this out. I've got this line here that says, above it, you keep these, okay? And below it, you submit these, okay? You have to create the fully populated, properly designed database on your computer, okay? And that's the first thing that you're going to send me, this restore script, okay? I will not be able to run your load procedures on my computer because it's very sensitive to where the data is. And there's no way, it turns out that there's no way for you to send me all those files and for me to run it. Okay? So this actually turns out, this step 5 is the first of the things that you submit. It's the O1 script that you hand in. Okay? Make sure that it's populated, that it has some data. I can't tell you how many people have handed them in with no data in them. Okay? And I've gotten to the point where I'm sick of, in the middle of grading, going back to people and said, you handed in a project without any data in it. I need the version with data in order to grade it. So please make sure that the files that you submit, which are all the things that you are creating in steps 5 through 9, make sure they have data and just the right data that you need. Now this step 5 is going to create a place to back up to if you're having problems with your queries and database maintenance scripts. Okay, so if you have a problem with your query, you have a problem with the maintenance, you try to do your inserts, it inserts wrong, or you try to do a change or delete, it does wrong. Well, just back up to here, okay? If your database is okay, if the schema doesn't have to change, right? And it's just a question of the workflow from the queries and the other scripts is not working the way you wanted, well, just simply back up to step 5. If, however, you've discovered that, for instance, you didn't fully implement one of the relationships in the database with a foreign key constraint, well, then you're going to have to go back and do steps 3 and 4 again. Okay? But again, I can't emphasize enough, you've got to send me a result from step 5. That's my starting point. That's the thing that I have on my computer. Okay, I've beaten that to death. Okay, one of the things that we haven't covered in class is step 3. Okay? No, I'm wrong. Where are we? Where's the... Oh, step 4. Populate the database by loading the test data that has been provided. So let me give you a look at that, how that goes. Okay? I have the files from a tutorial that I also posted to the final project. It was for an assignment where we were going to do a dump, a restore, an unload, a reload. And we didn't really have time to do that this summer, so I put that out as a tutorial. Here's a much shorter version of it. Okay, so let's go and take a look at. Let's go and take a look at Workbench. So logged into Workbench, and let me clear this. Okay, and what I've got here is I've got oh, well, I'm going to do something. I'm going to pause this and get to the point where I have a brand new copy of the AP database without the data in it. Okay, and since that's something that you're not going to have to do, I'm first going to drop the schema here and drop it. And now I'm going to pause this, and when I come back, I'm going to have my unpopulated copy of the AP database so I can show you how you do loads. Hang on. Okay, we're back. So what I've done in the meantime is to get a copy of the AP schema that came with the book. This is the one where I'm just going to demonstrate the skill, okay? And it has all the tables. But what I've done is I've truncated the data out of all the tables, okay? Because I had a full database. And of course, if I already have a full populated database, I'm not going to load the data over top of it. So what I want is to show you how to how to go and take a schema that has no data, that is unpopulated, and then how to load up the data from the table data files. Okay, well, how do we know it has no data? Well, here's the thing you can do. You can go over to the navigator panel, right-click on the on the database, and then pick Schema Inspector. And that's a tool we may not have used yet. And we want to look at the tab for tables. And you'll see that I have all of my tables for the AP database, but there are no rows in them. Well, why? Well, I had them. They were full of data, and I used the statement, the truncate on each of them just to get rid of the data, but not to get rid of the structure of the database. So before you load your tables in, you probably want to go to the Schema Inspector and confirm that you really do have an unpopulated database, which is where we are now. Then you're going to have to run the load you're going to have to create a load script. Okay, and what you can see here from my pop-up is in my directory where I'm putting my load script, I've also got all the CSV files that are appropriate for this database. They won't be the ones that are appropriate for yours at www because that's got a different set of tables. So there's one data file for each table. Okay, and in the same directory, I've got a load script. So I'm going to open that, and we're going to take a look at the load script. How does it begin? Well, the first thing it has is it says use the name of the database that you're trying to load the data into. Okay. The next thing that you want to make sure, and this makes this task harder rather than easier, is you want to make sure that foreign key checking is set to on. Okay. Now, it should be set to on unless you turned it off, but put this line in the script no matter what. Okay. And then there is a magic syntax here for each load. Okay, so you have to make sure that you follow the magic syntax. You also have to make sure that you load them in the right order. Okay, so let's talk about the order first. So I've got one for each of the files I'm trying to load. Okay, so let's go over to the AP database. We're looking at the table. So we've got general ledger accounts, invoice archive, invoice line items, invoices, terms. We have all these kind of things, but they're related to each other. So I'm just going to pop up somewhere. I think I have the I have the entity relationship diagram for that database. Okay, and we have these relationships. Okay, well, you have to load the tables that get pointed to before you load the tables that point to them. Okay, so for instance, here, okay, if vendors has a relationship to terms where we have a default terms ID and that's a foreign key that's in vendors, well, I can't load vendors until I've already loaded terms. Okay, if invoices has a relationship to vendors and has a relationship to terms, I can't load invoices until I've already loaded terms and vendors. If invoice line items has a relationship to general ledger accounts and invoices, then I can't load invoice line items until I've already loaded general ledger accounts and invoices. So there's an order that works and an order that doesn't. Okay? So let's go back to our script and we'll see what order am I doing this. Well, general ledger accounts, that doesn't point to anything. Terms, that doesn't point to anything. Vendor contacts doesn't point to anything. Vendors, what does that point to? It points to general ledger accounts and terms. That's okay, they're already loaded. Okay. Invoices, well, that points to vendors and terms. Okay, well, that's fine, they're already loaded. Invoice archive is just a table all by itself, so that we could have loaded that whenever we wanted to. And then invoice line item, this is the thing that points to what does it point to? Invoice line item points to general ledger accounts and to invoices. So if we come back here and we do invoice line item, we've already loaded invoices and we loaded general ledger accounts first. So order matters, okay? And I'm going to show you how they run in the right order, and I'm going to show you what happens when you get them in the wrong order, okay? So here, let's go to the syntax. You have to say load data local. That means that the data is not located with the server files. It's located with the directory that's currently being used by the Workbench client. Okay, so if you don't get local, it's not going to work. You have to say in file. You need the proper full path name and file. Okay, so you can't just have the file name that you're trying to use. You have to point to it from the very top of the file system. Okay, it turns out that this expression here on my Mac, this points to the directory that my script is currently in, and my script and the files we're loading from are in the same directory. Now, if I were on Windows, that would be some expression that begins with a C colon. I'd probably be on my C drive. Okay. So up here, after the proper path, you've got the file name and extension. Then you have the name of the table. This has to be the proper name of the table that's in the schema. Okay. This, we have fields terminated by comma and closed by quote, escape by //. Ignore one line. Why are we ignoring one line? Well, let's look at one of these data files. Let's look at the one for general ledger. Well, that's not going to work. So I'm going to open it in another editor so we can see it, and I'm going to pull it over on top of my work here. So let me open this with my favorite little Mac text editor, and I'll bring it over here, and I'll make these a little bigger. Okay. So here's that file. Okay. The first line in these dumped data files has the column names. Okay. So we're going to want to ignore the column names. Okay, when we do this kind of a load, it's not checking the column names. That's why you have to make sure you put the columns in the right order. All right. The other thing that we can get by looking at these files, and of course your files are going to be different, they're for the www database. How many rows should be in that table when we're done? Well, look at the total number of rows in this file. Okay, there are 76 rows with data. But do they all have a row? No, the first one has these column heads, which we are ignoring. So if we have 76 full lines and we're ignoring one, we should be loading 75 rows. Okay, so you can analyze these data files in order to make sure that all the rows properly loaded. Well, why might they not properly load? If you don't have the let's say you're not doing the loads in the right order, okay? So it goes to chase down the foreign key reference, but it can't find the row that you're trying to point to. Well, then that row is going to fail, okay? So if you don't do these in the right order and you don't have the foreign keys properly set up, instead of 75 rows, you might get 70 rows. Okay? It's only good when you get them all to load. Okay? All right, so let me hide this guy. So I've got this, and now I'm going to run it. Okay? Now, remember, we have here, I'm going to refresh to get the current number of rows. Okay, in the lower right there's a refresh. Sometimes the row numbers can get a little, the row counts can get a little stale, so it never hurts to refresh it, sometimes even 2-3 times to really get the real counts. Okay, so let's go back to the load script again. Use the name of the database, set foreign key checks equal 1, and then one of these groups for each table we're loading. And now I'm just going to run this, and we're going to look down here, okay, in the log, and the use worked, the set foreign keys worked, and we look at the counts here. Okay, they look good to me, okay? And I don't have any problems, okay? So let me go back. When I look at the messages, I don't see any things that failed. They all came back green. They're not coming back yellow or red, okay? So you definitely want them all to be green, okay? And now let's go back to the AP database, and let's refresh this the row counts again, and look what I've got. I've got 75, 0, 118, 114, 5, 8, 122. Well, we know that 75 is right, okay? And I happen to know that these are the right ones for this database, but let's check one more. Let's look at vendors. Is 122 the right count? Okay. Well, let's go back. Let's open the CSV file for vendors, okay, and see what it looks like. So, how many data rows are there? Well, it looks like this has wrapped around on me, okay. So I'm going to want to stretch it out so I can understand the row counts a little better. So there are 123 lines in the file, but again, the first line is has the column heads, and we're ignoring that. So instead of 123, we have 122 rows. So let's go confirm that that's actually true. Do we have 122 rows in the vendor file? Yeah, we do. So it's only through this kind of analysis, it's only through this kind of analysis that you can tell that you've loaded all these. What about if we did it the wrong way? What would that look like? Well, I'm going to pause it again, and I'm going to run the, well, you might want a thing like this, so we're not going to pause. So how can you empty the data? Okay, now one of the things you could do is you just go back and rerun the script that created the empty database. Okay, and that's probably what I would recommend that you do. The alternative is you can create a script that truncates the data out of all the tables. Okay, and so how could you do that? Well, I happen to have a script that truncates the data out of all the tables. So let's open this. So it begins with a use AP, the name of the database. It's a lot easier to not worry about the foreign key constraints when you're just trying to blow away all the data. So this is when you set foreign key checks equals 0, it just allows you to blow away all the data in the tables. That's why in my load script, I set it back to 1. Okay? And that's just always a good thing to do in the beginning of your load script. All right, so I've got the truncate, okay? And let me clear. And let me run my truncate. Well, I don't want to highlight anything. I want to run the whole thing. And it looks, it says 0 rows affected. I don't know why it says that. But let's go back to our schema inspector, and let's see if we do a refresh what the row counts are. And now they're 0. Okay. So I'm going to go back and say, well, what if I did things wrong in my loading of the data? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a save as. So I'm going to say File, Save Script As, and I'm going to call this, I'm going to put the word broken up front. Okay, so I want to break this. So the thing that has, the thing that points to a lot of a lot of other things is invoice line items. So I'm going to break this by trying to load it first. Okay, so let me load it first. Put it right up in the beginning. And I'm expecting that we're going to be trying to point to things in the other tables that haven't been loaded yet. So again, if you do it in the wrong order, it's going to create some trouble. So I guess we can save that because it has a new name. Let's give it a run, and let's clear out the messages and give it a run. And let's see, the first two ran fine, but look, number 3 has a warning on it. It has a yellow warning. It says I got 64 warnings. 1452 cannot add, well, that doesn't good. Cannot add or update a child row or foreign key constraint fails. Well, okay, so let's go and look at that. Table now. Okay, they're all 0. Let's do a refresh. And where's invoice line items? So invoice line items. It has 118 rows, but they're not connected to the other one. 64 rows had connections that are broken. Okay, so even though the count of 118 is right, it put all the rows in, but it wasn't able to build the relationships. Okay, so just the fact that we have this warning here, this is not ready to go. Okay, so then you have to back up, right, to get a fresh empty copy, and then you have to get these things in the proper order. Okay, what's the proper order look like? Well, let me do this. I'm going to run my truncate again. Okay, and that's going to empty out all the data, and the truncate's all ran. Clear. All right, and then I'm going to go into look at the schema inspector again, and I'm going to go down to the lower right and refresh. All the rows, all the tables are empty again. So, and now I'm going to go back and I'm going to run the proper version of the load that runs. It runs the load for invoice line items last when all the tables that we're pointing to are already loaded. They have all their rows in them. And we're going to see that this is going to run just fine. So let's give this a run. And there it is, right there. Everything ran. Oh, I'm sorry, it runs last. So 118 rows affected, no warnings, nothing. Everything fine. So, it's going to take you some time to get the order of these correct. All right. It might help you to have both a load and a truncate. Okay. Or you can go back and just reload the unpopulated copy of the database, and by that I mean sorry. Whatever you have at the end of step 3, right? So you come to step 3, you try to populate the database, it doesn't work. Well, you can back up to what you say from step 3 and run that again, or you could have something like the truncate. I had to have a truncate because I didn't really have an empty schema here. I had the AP database, which was full of data. So I had to write a truncate. So that's it. That's the trickiest thing that we have here. Okay? I just want to make a couple of comments about the workflow at the end. Okay? So let me go to the end here. Oh, I had two other comments. One I've already made, but I just want to show you it in my annotated version. Okay, so in step 5, you are creating the database restore script. This is the first thing you're going to hand in to me. This creates a populated copy of the database. Make sure it's populated, okay? So after you run this, okay, make sure that you really are loading up a proper copy of the database. Now, I'm going to tell you a way to make sure that you're loading the data, okay, and you're not accidentally just loading a part of it, okay? Before you run this in your testing, okay, you create this O1 file. Before you run it, go to Workbench, okay, and drop the schema, okay? That for sure is going to blow away everything, okay? It's going to blow away the data. That's going to It's going to blow away the structure, everything. So then when you come back and you run this O1 file, and then you look and see, yeah, your tables are properly loaded, that's what you need, then you know that this is doing the right thing. But don't send me a database that doesn't have your test data in it, because I'm not in the position to load it up for you. Okay? It's a tricky business, as I just showed you. Okay? All right. Now, the very end of this workflow, sorry, let's go down here. The very end of the workflow is a couple of steps. So, step 8, retest your entire system flow, okay? I mean retest it. So go back, blow away your database, okay, in Workbench, drop the schema, make sure there's no evidence of the schema at all, drop it, okay, and then run your files, 1, 2, 3, I think it's all the way to 14, let's just look. Yeah, all the way to 14, okay? Check that you got the right results after each one, okay? If you do that, then you know it works, okay? So many people don't run it from beginning to end, and what they do is that they make some changes. Let's say they're working on number 10 or number 12, and they have a problem. If they go back, they change their schema, okay? They get number 10 and number 12 to work, but what's happened is that they've broken number 5 or 6, okay? So you need to make sure that when you're done with all 14, that they run in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 14, and they work. If they don't work, you still have some work left to do, okay? The very last thing that you need to do is you need to zip this up. Okay, so you needed it into, put it into a directory with a proper name, okay, with all the files that you're handing in. You need to zip it, okay? Would you go and test this one more time to prove that you can unzip it in any place in your file system? I want to make sure that you don't have anything in your scripts that point to some directory that I don't have. Okay? This is, some people will export this zip and they'll send it to me, and they've got code in their scripts that relies upon how things were set up in their machine. Well, I'm not testing it on your machine. I'm testing it on my machine. One way to simulate that is to just put that zip file in some really out-of-the-way place in your file system and unzip it, and then make sure that you can open that up with Workbench, and that you can run the files from 01 through 14. If you can do that, there's the chance that you will send me something that I can't run. It's probably very, very, very close to 0. Probably 0.000000001. Okay? If you don't do that, the chance that you're going to send me something that I can't run is about 50%. Okay? So there's a lot of tricks to this. This is the kind of thing you have to do with a real project. It's very fussy. Okay? Very, very fussy. So one of the reasons that I'm having you do it is if you can make this work and you have to do something like this on the job, you'll have been through the whole workflow, and you'll know how prone it is to mistakes and how very, very fragile the whole thing is. And when you get done, you'll have a real accomplishment on your hands. So that's it. I'm going to post all this up under the final project. Good luck. If you get stuck on things and you need some help, it's certainly okay to to post about it, to contact me. Again, I don't want people copying code from each other, but tips are okay. And I'm certainly willing to give out a lot of tips about what I think has you stuck. So good luck. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.